Today, I would like to talk about a subject that is sometimes misunderstood and even misled in the Islamic world: Wahhabism. Wahhabism can be defined as a journey beyond the borders of Islam. This journey is full of deviations and misinterpretations from the basic principles of Islam. It is an approach that does not comply with the Sunnah wal Jama'ah and contradicts the essence of Islam. So why is Wahhabism outside of Islam? Let me present some evidence. Wahhabism is a revolution of heresy that emerged in the history of Islam. They deviated from the basic principles of Islam and departed from the path of their Salafi ancestors. Wahhabism adopts an approach that imposes its own interpretations rather than imitating the Quran and Hadith. They deviate from the method of interpretation applied by Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Wahhabism also stands out with extremism and bigotry. They show intolerance for the beliefs and practices of others and act contrary to Islam's message of tolerance and unity. Wahhabism has a structure that divides and separates societies. It legitimizes violence and overshadows Islam's message of peace and justice. Islam is a religion of tolerance, peace, and justice. We must walk on the path of the Sunnah wal Jama'ah and remain faithful to the essence of Islam. Perverted paths such as Wahhabism distract us from the true essence of Islam and disrupt social peace. Wahhabism, called the revolution of bid'ah, is considered an important turning point in the history of Islam. The Wahhabism movement, which deviated from the basic principles of Islam and departed from the path of its predecessors, has had a significant impact on the Islamic society. In this section, let's discuss the concepts of Wahhabism and heresy revolution in detail. Wahhabism is a religious movement founded by Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab in the Arabian Peninsula in the 18th century and primarily influential in Saudi Arabia. Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab considered various practices and traditions that the Islamic society saw at that time as perversion and rejected them. His main argument is that there should be a return to the original principles of Islam and the direct interpretation of the Quran and Hadiths. Wahhabism is called the heresy revolution because this movement adopted a new religious understanding by deviating from the traditional interpretations of Islam. He especially rejected traditional practices such as visiting shrines, pilgrimages to sacred places, and visits to the graves of saints, and described them as bid'ah. This revolution led to a significant debate and division in the Islamic world. While some see the Wahhabism movement as a return to the original principles of Islam, others have criticized it as a manifestation of predecessor Islam. It was especially criticized by other Islamic sects and communities, and Wahhabism was seen as a deviation from the core values of Islam. Imitative interpretations are an important concept related to the way Wahhabism interprets the basic texts of Islam. Wahhabism adopts an understanding that imposes its own interpretations rather than directly interpreting the Quran and Hadiths, and often differs from its predecessors. In this section, let's discuss in detail the imitative interpretations of Wahhabism and how the Sunnah wal Jama'ah deviated from the traditional interpretation method and developed a new approach. Wahhabism often adopts the Salafist approach to interpreting the foundational texts of Islam. However, unlike the Sunni tradition, Wahhabis often tend to impose their own interpretations. This leads to a rigid and narrow way of interpreting the understanding of the Quran and Hadith, and they are often closed to interpretations of other Islamic sects. Wahhabism, as a result of the Salafist understanding, strives to directly interpret the Quran and Hadiths. However, in this process of interpretation, they deviate from the tradition of Sunnah wal Jama'ah and often adopt a different approach from the traditional method of interpretation. For this reason, a concept called imitative interpretations arise. Copycat interpretations have led to criticism of Wahhabism's interpretation of the foundational text of Islam. Other Islamic sects and communities criticize Wahhabism's narrow and rigid approach to understanding the Quran and Hadith. It is also stated that this approach leads to divisions and conflicts of understanding in the Islamic world. Extremism and bigotry are one of the important features of the Wahhabism movement. This movement often exhibits an overly conservative and intolerant attitude, may be hostile towards the beliefs and practices of others, and may go against Islam's message of tolerance and unity. In this section, let's examine how Wahhabism is characterized by extremism and bigotry, and how this attitude contradicts the basic principles of Islam. Wahhabism often adopts an extremely conservative and rigid religious understanding. Members of this movement can often go to extremes in interpreting Islam and evaluate the essence of the religion from a narrow perspective. They may be intolerant of others' beliefs and practices and may adopt a hostile attitude towards different beliefs and sects. Bigotry is another distinctive feature of Wahhabism. Members of this movement tend to blindly defend their own beliefs and practices and may show intolerance towards other beliefs and practices. They may display a prejudiced attitude towards different beliefs and sects, contrary to Islam's message of tolerance and unity. Extremism and bigotry contributed to the spread of Wahhabism and its increasing influence in Islamic societies. However, these attitudes often conflict with the basic tenets of Islam. While Islam highlights the message of tolerance, justice, and unity, Wahhabism's emphasis on extremism and bigotry can harm the core values of Islam and lead to divisions between societies. Violence and division are prominent features of Wahhabism and can lead to serious social and religious problems in Islamic societies. Wahhabism often has a structure that legitimizes violence and can have a divisive effect on societies. In this section, let's examine Wahhabism's stance on violence and division, and how this stance overshadows Islam's message of peace and justice. Wahhabism is a movement that often has radical and extreme views. Members of this movement often impose their own religious interpretations on others, and may be intolerant of different beliefs and practices. This situation may lead to polarization and separation within society and weaken the sense of unity and solidarity of Islamic societies. Justifying violence is also an important feature of Wahhabism. Members of this movement may resort to violence to protect their own religious understanding or adopt an aggressive attitude towards different beliefs and practices. This situation can lead to insecurity and unrest in society and overshadow the message of peace and justice of Islam. Violence and division contributed to the spread of Wahhabism and its increasing influence. However, these attitudes often conflict with the basic tenets of Islam. While Islam brings to the fore the message of peace, justice, and tolerance, Wahhabism's emphasis on violence and division can harm the core values of Islam and lead to polarization among societies. Wahhabism is known for rejecting many concepts contained in traditional interpretations of Islam. One of these concepts is the concept known as Friends of Allah, or Evliyaullah, which has an important place in the Islamic tradition. According to Islamic belief, Evliyaullah are people who are close to Allah and are considered His beloved servants. They are people known for their closeness to God and their wisdom, filled with spiritual strength and divine love. However, the Wahhabism movement hesitates to accept or rejects the concept of saints. This approach is based on a monotheistic and simple belief emphasized in the teachings of Wahhabism. According to some Wahhabi teachings, focusing on friends of Allah or their holiness can undermine the unity of Allah or mean associating partners with Him. Therefore, Wahhabism emphasizes turning only to Allah and worshiping Him, rejecting the belief in saints or their spiritual status. In this context, Wahhabism has historically taken a distance from or rejected the concept of saints. Despite this, within the broad spectrum of Islam, The belief in saints continues to hold an important place and is accepted by many Muslim communities. In the Wahhabi approach, the interpretation of the verses of the Quran is generally based on a rigid and strict form of interpretation. Wahhabis prefer to adhere only to the surface meaning of the Quran and generally reject deeper meanings or interpretations of the Quran. For this reason, in Wahhabism, the verses of the Quran are generally interpreted according to their own understanding and desires. In particular, Wahhabis tend to accept the verses directly with their surface meanings, rather than taking into account the deeper meanings and interpretations brought by commentators or commentators in the Islamic tradition. This approach often leads to a rigid and inflexible way of interpreting and causes them to have a narrow and limited understanding of the content of the Quranic verses. This shows that the Wahhabism movement has a different way of interpreting it than the traditionally taught interpretations accepted across the broad spectrum of Islam. According to Wahhabi teachings, the surface meaning of Quranic verses is usually sufficient and no deeper meaning or interpretation is needed. This shows that the Wahhabi approach differs from other Islamic traditions in interpreting and understanding the Quran. Another feature of the Wahhabism movement is that they generally consider those who do not comply with their understanding or follow different sects of Islam as infidels. This is especially important for Muslims living in countries with various Islamic traditions and sects, such as Turkey. Wahhabi teachings tend to characterize Muslims who do not conform to their interpretation or who belong to different sects as heretics. This can lead to tensions and divisions, especially in societies where different Islamic sects and traditions have historically coexisted. In a traditionally Hanafi country like Turkey, the spread of Wahhabi teachings may encourage a form of intolerance towards the religious understandings and practices of those from different Islamic traditions. This may cause divisions and polarization in society. Therefore, it is possible that the Wahhabism movement is not accepted or welcomed among Muslims in Turkey, because this movement generally has a harsh attitude, viewing different beliefs or sects as infidels. This may lead to division and conflict instead of unity and solidarity in society. Wahhabism movement is known for adopting a belief system different from the main currents of Islam and having radical views on some theological issues. Representatives of this movement deviate from ordinary Islamic belief on some issues and put forward different views. One of these is the tendency to believe that God exists in a place limited to the earth. Some representatives of the Wahhabism movement claim that Allah is on a throne, limited to a certain direction or place. However, this view is not accepted in the mainstream of Islam and is not confirmed in the Quran. According to the basic teachings of Islam, Allah is a limitless and all-encompassing being. He is free from space and time and is not bound to any place or place. Therefore, advocating a limited positioning of Allah, such as being present in a physical space or sitting on a throne, is contrary to the mainstream of Islam. For this reason, these and similar theological views of the Wahhabi movement often lead to debates and objections in the Islamic world. According to the main currents of Islam, the limitlessness and all-encompassing existence of Allah is emphasized, and it is stated that he is free from space and time. This is an approach that, unlike the Wahhabi movement, preserves the holiness and greatness of Allah and is more in line with the basic teachings of Islam. While the Wahhabism school takes historical scholars such as Ibn Taymiyyah as a reference, some of Ibn Taymiyyah's views have been subjected to criticism. Some of his views conflict with the mainstream teachings of Islam and have even led to discord and divisions in the Islamic world. In particular, his views on war and jihad are considered by some to be incompatible with Islam's message of peace and tolerance. In addition, some of Ibn Taymiyyah's controversial fatwas and his excessive emphasis on the Salafi understanding are contrary to the universal message of Islam. Therefore, Radical groups such as Wahhabism, while taking up some of Ibn Taymiyyah's views, actually deviate from the basic principles of Islam. To understand and live true Islam, it is important to adhere to the mainstream teachings of Islam and the creed of Sunnah. As a result, the school known as Wahhabism represents an understanding that has deviated from the main currents of Islam and is contrary to its traditional teachings. This school has been associated with negative elements such as intolerance, radicalism, and separatism. Therefore, instead of relying on the teachings of this school, it would be better to understand the universal message of Islam and adhere to its traditional teachings. It is important to understand that Islam is a peaceful and loving religion, not intolerant. Therefore, it would be healthier not to listen to this school and to turn to teachings that are in line with the true spirit of Islam. O our Almighty Lord, as we gather in your presence, let us give eternal thanks for showing us the right path, illuminating our hearts with the light of guidance, leading us to the truth and enabling us to understand the surprising truths. Make us among those who follow the right path, and protect us from being led astray and astray. O our Lord, give us knowledge and wisdom. Fill our hearts with faith. Allow us to see the truth and follow the truth. Give us wisdom and understanding, and enable us to be servants who desire only your consent and pleasure. Give us the enthusiasm to follow the truth when we see it, and to reach the truth when we are wrong. Grant us the grace to progress step by step on your path, and to stay away from all kinds of discord and perversion. O our merciful Lord, always separate us from the truth, protect us from not seeing the truth, and fill our hearts with guidance. Show us the path in which we will find peace and gain your consent. Keep us firm on the path of your beloved prophet and those who follow the right path. Give us faith, wisdom, and insight. Grant us the grace to be servants who think, understand, and learn. Raise us as people who work for your sake, defend justice and righteousness, and are full of tolerance and love. Accept our prayers, O the most merciful of the merciful, our Lord.